Good morning, everybody. No, I missed last week. I was busy with some other stuff, as some of you were probably already aware. Um, but I did get some stuff done, and I did a little research and looked into some things, and I just wanted to go over that with you all today. We did a poll, an open poll to all of our users a couple months ago, asking what they thought the development priorities should be. And after the application sensing, which I think we have working pretty well right now, after that, the next one that people were interested in was the actual mapping and mapping options. Um, and while there is some rudimentary mapping currently already in 1.7, it's obviously not near as robust as what I do plan to have or what I originally envisioned. What we originally had is right now you could currently take a channel, map it from one channel to another. Now what we are going to be doing is adding several options to determine how those channels are mapped from one to another, meaning you can alter it in certain ways. I'll just go into it here. Delete that one. Add a mapping override. So you see this window, UI, obviously not finished yet, still pretty rudimentary. You got the source channels. We can select what we're going to map from. I have a DualShock 4 plugged in here, or actually rather connected over Bluetooth. So we're going to select DualShock 4, and all these buttons really do is it changes the naming convention to match that device. So you see the channels are the channels are actually still the same. You'll see these say L1, R1, L2, R2. Whereas if you go to an Xbox controller, you see the name switch from left bumper, left trigger, right trigger. So the channels are all still the same. This just makes it easier for users with the different devices. So we're going to use the DualShock 4, and for giggles, we're going to say left stick X here. And we're going to go over here and we're going to map that to right stick X. Now down here in the advanced, this is what we're going to be adding. Source mixing, use high value, low value, or average values together. What that means is if for source channel, you can actually select multiple options. And what it'll do is all those source channels, it'll take them, and depending on what you select there for source mixing, it'll average them together, use the highest one or use the lowest one. But we're going to keep it simple for now. We're just going to say left stick X is right stick X. This will have default values in it. I haven't set that up yet, but the default is going to be to use the high, because that's the least, well, high and low are the least mathematically intensive. So lowest latency, average, we'll add a touch. Don't even worry about it. Averaging that numbers is something a CPU can do quick. But by default, I'm going to use high value. Source filtering. It can take any of the values. It can take only the positive values, or it can take only the negative values. And the reason I am doing that is, say you wanted to map, a stick has, a positive side and a negative side, but maybe you only wanted to map the X axis if you push it to the right. You don't want it to do anything if you push it to the left. So you would have to add a source filter on here to only use the positive values to apply to that mapping. And that would be specifically like if you were going to map this actually to a button instead of another axis. So let's say right stick X. We want that to be. We're going to swap the stick and the D-pad. So we're going to say right stick X, is D-pad right. Use the high value, that's still fine. We're only going to use the positive value because we want the right stick throw to be the D-pad right. So you do that, that's how you set that up. You hit OK, and then obviously you're going to have to add another one for the left stick X negative value to be the D-pad left. But that is how you do the mapping. It seems a little bit, well actually it's certainly a lot different than previous versions of InputMapper. But the reason for, using these options in order to be able to map one thing to another is because InputMapper 7 isn't restricting you to a DualShock or a 360 controller or anything like that anymore. There's going to be keyboards, there's going to be mice, there's going to be almost anything else you can think of. The 3D move controllers, the VR controllers, stuff like that. All that stuff can be incorporated into InputMapper, and eventually, as time permits, will be incorporated as I get my hands on them and add them. But adding the, keeping the mapping like this, open-ended, where you might have to add a couple more clicks in there to specify what you want it to do, but ultimately it'll allow for more by not restricting you as much. Anyways, moving along, reversing values. This will be if it's you want to maybe flip your y-axis. If you're one of those crazy people that likes to invert your y, but the game doesn't allow for it. There's an option here in InputMapper that'll do it for you. Toggle. This is a common one people ask for, especially in games that don't have toggleable runs, crouches, or leaning. You'll be able to toggle buttons, so you push it once, you release it, the button will stay pushed. You push it again, release it, and then the button will release. So you'll be able to toggle buttons. I'm also going to implement a way to toggle axes as well. The logic of that's going to be a little more difficult. I'll have to play around with it, but yeah. What I'm thinking is if you push an axis one direction and you release it back to center, or what the roundabout center, it'll keep the highest value you had until you go back to it or past it, and then it'll release it, or it'll let it go back to whatever center is. So that's how I'm going to handle toggles for axes. And then last but not least, or at least last so far, is going to be frequency. And that's going to be like your rapid fire or repetition. I'm going to do it in, instead of like I used to have a slider, I'm going to have it more granular, where you can actually put in how many hertz you want it to be. So if you type in 100 hertz, that means if you hold down the A button or the X button, whatever, it's going to push it and release it 100 times per second. It can only go up so high. The theoretical maximum will be whatever speed that the program is able to loop on your computer, and that will depend basically on the performance of your computer. Better CPUs will be able to achieve higher theoretical maximums because the actual application is able to cycle faster. But slower CPUs will be obviously less. But I don't think it's going to be any less than 100 a second, even on a crappy computer, because even that is what USB pulls at. Whenever you're using a USB device or a Bluetooth device, unless you have special gaming drivers for like gaming mice, it's usually only reading about 100 frames per second from that device. And if you want it to go slower than once per second, you would use a decimal. So if I said 0.5 hertz, that means it's going to cycle half every 1 second, which is the same as saying it's cycling once every 2 seconds. Hopefully people will understand that. I don't know if I need to find a simpler way to convey that, if people are able to figure out, how that ratio works, using decimals as hertz and all that stuff. But we'll see. Right now it's just the easiest to implement because taking this and turning it into an actual like a pooling speed is really simple programming. So that's why I have it set up this way, because it's nice and easy. So all that said and done, that is the current features that I am implementing. As I think of any more, I'll throw them in. Another thing that I am going to work on in parallel as I finish this up is going to be axis tuning, which was a big hit in the original, like the late releases of 1.5. I really got into that stuff that had where you could graph it out and everything. 1.6 leaned away from it a little bit, but it's definitely going to come back in a big way here in 1.7. And not only am I going to have the where you can set the curve. Previously, the definable parameters were sensitivity, curve, and dead zone. But now you're going to be able to choose different types of curves, whether or not they're quadratic, exponential, inverse quadratic, blah, blah, blah. I know I'm just throwing stuff out there. I don't know if you guys know what any of that stuff means, but pretty much they're different formulas to define how X translates into Y. So whether or not it's a nice smooth curve, or if it starts out slow and then gets a lot steeper towards the end, there's different math that's used for each of those. And previously I was just using, I think I was just using quadratic growth, something like that, for my X to Y relation. But now I'm going to have it that's user selectable, and I'll be able to add more in there as I, think of different, formulas and all that stuff for it. I'm also, something I really want to do, but I got to make sure that I can do it in a manner that doesn't destroy latency. I want to be able to not only have it governed by a formula if you want to do it quick and easy. I would also like users to be able to draw their own graph by dragging points onto there. So they can set up, maybe a maximum of 5 points, I think is reasonable, something like that. Somewhere in between 5 to 7 probably. People will be able to, plot their own points, and then it'll use that as the curve. So say they want something, really funky, they'll be able to drag their points around, and, it won't necessarily be a curve. They can make it whatever they want. So again, all that stuff, it's, stuff I'm kicking around in my head and, thinking about as I write this, as stuff that I do want to plan. Right now, one of the things that I'm really focusing on is in this mapping. I'm just going to cancel out of that. A bug that I came across, or not really a bug, but something I didn't really consider until now. When I'm doing this, let's stick X. I'm going to do this again real quick to, no, actually I want to do right stick X. No advanced. All right, so one of the issues that I came across when doing this is if I am taking the X from the left stick, mapping it to the right stick, it seems like it's also keeping the source channel in the destination. So if I go over here to droid.cpl, what is this, new profile? Let's switch this to, oh, I don't want to use DualShock 4, I want to use 360. Switch that to new profile. Canceled. Have I discovered a bug? Where's my 360 controller? Default. New profile. Okay. Yeah, apparently we just discovered a bug for some reason. As I connected the controller, the virtual didn't show up without me switching in and out of it, or in and out of the profile. So I'll take a look at that. But anyways, back to what we were talking about. If I go to the virtual controller now, which is this 360, go to properties, and what I was mapping was my left stick X. Oh, well, that ain't working at all, is it? No, I don't want Steam. Interesting. It looks like we have a bug, or a rather severe bug on that virtual controller. Okay, so let's see if I can map it actually instead to a DualShock 4. Go back to default, go back to new profile. Ah, okay, it's not reading inputs from my DualShock 4 for some reason. So, I will discover what that issue is at a later time. In the meantime, what I am going to do is plug in a Xbox One controller to try to at least finish this video. Okay, Xbox One controller. New profile, we're going to send that to a DualShock 4. New profile. Okay, this one should be the virtual DualShock 4. I've got a couple extras there that aren't cleaning up property. Okay, there we go. This is reading. All right, so got to figure out why DualShock 4s are not reading. Anyways, you see here, the X is what I mapped, the left stick X, but you see it's also keeping the source value. So I'm getting, in the final virtual controller, I'm getting both the source and the destination. And it should only be the destination. If you're doing a mapping override, it should override what that source is. So what that is just a matter of, it looks like I am applying that mapping back to the actual device state that is being pulled from the source device, instead of creating a brand new device state, applying it to that, and anything that doesn't have a mapping override, copy it over. So that's something I need to work on, obviously, after I figure out why the DualShock 4 isn't working anymore. I thought it was working before. That'll about do it today, guys. Obviously, I got a couple things I got to work on. So I will let you know, and I will try to get a new build out this week that has a lot of this new stuff that I was covering in it. All right, have a good one.